Hey, well, welcome everyone to another exciting edition of the Magic Sandwich Show, which has been put together due to last-minute hitches in the last minute. I brought in as a special guest, and it's a huge favour he's done us for stepping in at the last moment, Seth Andrews of the Thinking Atheist Show. Welcome to the show, Seth.
Glad to be here. It was kind of nice to get the message at the last moment. I had this window, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice to hang out with some infidels for 60 minutes? And boom, it's a miracle. You appeared.
We also joined, as I say, by Concordance, one of the regulars on the show. But we're going to start with Seth. You have been quite busy, and you've got a busy schedule coming up, Seth. Talk us through it.
Yeah, in the best possible sense of the word. I've been really flying here for the last part of 2012, and it seems to be increasing in 2013. But I just released a book, and of course, I've been trying to get the word out about it. You know, I wanted to succeed, and I want people to hopefully positively respond to it. And I'm doing a tour here in the first part of the year. We're getting set. I'm actually doing a book signing in my hometown of Tulsa on Saturday, and then we're doing a speech in Oklahoma City. I'm speaking at Tulsa University shortly after that, and then I'm doing this run in Texas. We're going to be in Amarillo, Texas. We're going to Dallas, Fort Worth. We're doing San Antonio, Houston, landing in Austin finally for the week of the American Atheist Convention, which is going to be an amazing weekend. And Lawrence, Kansas after that for Reason Fest in April. And on top of all that, all the other obligations that, seem to pile up. I would like to be able to sort of cast that net even further. People are like, are you coming to Chicago? Are you coming to, Tampa? Are you coming here or there? And I'm like, I would love to. But I'm sort of tethered right now because the responsibilities of everyday life, as they so often do, seem to dictate how much you can and cannot do.
I hate responsibilities. But anyway, for the sake of the audience, this is the book which Seth very kindly sent me a copy of. I confess that I have not read it all. I have started reading it. But one thing I did was to flick through and look at the photographs. And if for no other reason, you need to buy this book because there, in the center page,
Wow.
I don't know whether you're going to be able to see that, is, amongst other people, myself. Seth,
he really is a beautiful man. He's a beautiful man.
I also get a mention in the book, which I'm very, very touched by. Those that watched the last show, or the videos of the last show, will recall that I think I mentioned the book, and I gave a link in the description to the videos when I'm posted on YouTube as to where you could go to get that, and I will do the same in relation to this show when it is subsequently
I
posted.
did not ask DPR to do this. I did not ask him to slug. I swear to you, I did not whore him out saying, please, help me sell some books.
I'm just a genuinely nice person. I know people find that difficult to believe, Seth, but it's true. But why don't you tell us a little bit? I mean, I think the title kind of gives it away, but tell us a little bit about it.
I want to say about the photograph of all of us. It was you, me, and Thunderfoot, and Healthy Addict, and Christina Rad is in there, and Aaron, and that was right after the Reason rally, and we'd all gone back to the hotel because they were starting the American Atheist Convention of last year, and we were all together and managed to snap that photograph. And that's one of my favorite photos ever, of all of us just hanging out in the hotel lobby, or we were up near the elevator, wherever it was. And we all just stopped, and everybody all of a sudden began snapping photographs. And that photograph brings a smile to my face every time I see it, every time I think about it. It was such an amazing memory. The book itself is not, it ain't Hitchens, for Pete's sake. It's not like a grand literary work. I don't even know how much new ground it breaks. What it does, though, is it was sort of cathartic for me to be able to take the very deeply religious upbringing of my youth and my immersion as a Christian broadcaster. I was a Christian radio guy for over a decade, and we played Christian music, and we prayed on the air, and we had preachers, and we brought in Christian conferences, and I come from that culture. I mean, I was neck deep in religiosity, and to have crawled out and to now see it through a different lens, I wanted to translate that and to sort of chronicle, because some people are struggling with their own journeys out of religion, right? They still feel guilt. They still struggle with fears of hell. I don't want to go to hell. I have nightmares about it. These things are real. I wanted to encourage those people. I also wanted to help inform the lifelong non-believer of what it is like to grow up when your very first memories are vacation Bible school and praying before meals and praying over your skinned knees and learning Jesus stories like you would learn about anything else, as if they were absolute fact. And so it's really sort of a chronology from then to now. And it ends with, I think, a high note, just a real encouragement to people that, hey, continue on, because we're really starting to see, at least in the United States, a change in the temperature of the discussion. Plus, honestly, lately, DPR, I've had on my mind, and I'm speaking about this on the tour stops a lot and at the American Atheist Convention, I just found myself just really irritated by the indoctrination of children. I mean, it's always bothered me, but lately it seems to be the defining fire in my belly, the taking of our youngest, of our most impressionable, of our most vulnerable, and they cart them into a room and they tell them happy stories about floating zoos and all of these things that are in the Bible. And then on top of that, then they sort of close escrow by saying, and by the way, if you don't believe this, you'll be fried in a furnace. And I consider this to be child abuse, and I think it has to be stopped. And this, for some reason lately, is the one thing that's made me just, sometimes the worst things are done with the best of intentions. My parents honestly believed they were rescuing me from hell. So they were doing God's good work. They were operating from the best of intentions, but they instilled in me this fear of this torture chamber. And it took a long time to get over that, long time.
Concordance, do you want to, excuse me? Concordance, do you want to comment on that?
Not on Seth in particular, no.
Well, I do, because it's a gripe that I've had for some time, and a lot of people think that I'm going too far when I express my views, that I think that the teaching of even the basic Christian tenets is a form of child abuse, for the reasons that you've outlined, Seth. I don't think that they can get away from that, because it is a central tenet that unless you accept Jesus Christ, you are going to burn forever in hell. And to instill that degree of fear in a child, I cannot put it any other way. It is an abuse of that child.
And they create, the church is such a happy place in so many ways, especially when it comes to children. And we talk about this in the speech in Austin. I won't blow it all here, but it's happy. I mean, you show up and there's smiles and everyone loves seeing you, and you check in and you go to your classroom where you sing songs about Zacchaeus up in the sycamore tree, and you sing the song about Joshua and the walls came a-tumbling down at Jericho, and you sing deep and wide, there's a fountain growing deep and wide, and you say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag and to the Bible, and there's smiles and there are hugs and there's constant reassurance. It is really, on the surface, a very positive place. It's a reinforcing place, and it's a place where you want to be. The problem is that if the foundation of all of this pleasantness and joy and happiness and smiles and hugs and affirmation and belonging and purpose and all this, if the foundation of this is mythology, is fiction, we have to say something. We have to hold up our hand, no matter how unpopular it is, especially here in the Midwest, Southwest, and say, wait a minute. This is inhibiting young minds. This is damaging. And of course, here they are with all these happy, wonderful children singing about Jesus. And they go, well, how could you ever speak out against something like this? Look at how happy and fulfilled and purpose-driven these children are. We've given them joy. We've given them something that no one else ever could. How could you joyless, atheist, infidel, rudderless, sad, pathetic, whatever you are, come here and attempt to steal their joy? And it's an unpopular thing to do. But shouldn't the number one thing we're teaching our children is it true? Is it true? And then on top of that, if you get into the hell teaching, which is usually the second part of the equation, right? They teach them joy and happiness, and the default position is if they ever start to question, then they threaten them with hell. Say, look, you will go to hell if you don't believe. And that I consider to be psychological abuse, something that must be stopped as soon as possible.
See, maybe I'm a little unusual. I'm an atheist who occasionally goes to church, and for me, it's much more about this very surface level of community building and charitable acts and just sort of a sense of coming together for a common purpose.
Do you do like a Unitarian kind of thing, or where do you?
No, I go to the local Methodist church, along with a lot of other. I would imagine quite a few other people in the same boat who sort of wrestle with their doubt every day, whether that's from the side of faith or from the side of non-faith. And I would not let my kids go to a church that was hell and brimstone. I was very careful in choosing that. But I grew up in a milquetoast Christian church. I can't say that I received any psychological damage from it. It didn't resonate with me very much, but I honestly think that if you prepare people with the right tools, rather than telling them what is true, which is really puts you in no stronger position than you get from church, from the Sunday school teacher. This is true. Instead, if you teach the kids how to think, if you teach them the critical thought process to evaluate claims, I can quote a few things my son has said about Noah's Ark. He said, "I don't buy it. I don't buy it." Right? And I think he was 7 at the time, and it was just so obviously false to him that I actually think that is more powerful to me than telling him what to think about Noah's Ark, right? Tell him the story. Let him suss it out. Let him evaluate it against what they understand. And if you've got a kid that's sharp enough with the right tools, I don't think it necessarily matters where they're at until they've had it beaten out of them. It takes a whole lot of constant repetition and psychological trauma to bring someone to the point where they are afraid to believe, or afraid not to believe, where they're afraid to use critical thinking. But a free mind that's able to use those tools will inevitably come to the same conclusion that all of us came to independently by those same tools.
Well, let me frame it like this. Oh, I'm sorry, Concordance. Forgive me, man.
No, that's all right, Seth. Go ahead.
Well, I'm in 3rd grade, right? And I'm in a little elementary school called Carl Sandburg Elementary. I come home to my parents and I start telling them what I learned about cavemen. And, it's the invention of the waves. It's very simplistic teaching, but what I remember is it's Neanderthal man, it's cavemen, and the harnessing of fire and all these things. And, of course, all this stands well outside of the Adam and Eve story. And so I go home and I tell my mother and father. Well, they are alarmed enough that they almost immediately pull my entire family, me and my twin sister, my younger sister, all out of public school, and they put us in a small private school. And they isolate us from all the other ideas that are out there. They are so threatened by an origin story of humankind that falls outside of the biblical construct. They don't really want us to hear it. They want us to be surrounded by confirmation bias. So they throw us into this tiny cocoon, this little biosphere, where everybody agrees with us, everybody looks the same, talks the same, prays the same. This is a defense mechanism that religion often uses when it comes to children. Now, it's kind of an extreme case, but in my case, they taught us what to think. You're absolutely right. They didn't tell us how to digest information, how to seek truth. They wanted us to be sort of echoes of their own particular worldview, and so they put us in an environment where no one ever disagreed with it. And when I think about it, it kind of irritates me. In fact, it really irritates me when I think about it. So,
yeah, absolutely. And so I think that if you took a kid and put them in, let's say, a creationist class, and growing up they begin to sort of probe the edges of that, like, wait, if that's the direct work of God, if God poofed humans into existence, why am I memorizing chemical periodic tables? Like, why is there such a magical component to biology, but all this non-magical stuff with chemistry? And I think maybe I'm appealing only to these sort of slightly more intellectual, more intelligent, sharper, more critical minds.
So I'm a dumbass for taking so long to come out. No, I hear that rebuke.
Right? They had to shut down. They had to shut down your ability to interpret the evidence. They were afraid. Your parents were afraid of you listening to that and saying, "Yeah, that sounds about right," or seeing the evidence in the textbook.
Cold water on curiosity is essentially when you have God did it. And then, when you become an older adult, everybody around you goes to church. If it doesn't make sense, Noah's Ark seems kind of stupid, you don't really think about it. You blink it away and you live your life. And that's where most people exist, is kind of in that membrane of non-participation. You say the name of God. You go to church from time to time. It's culturally popular, but you don't really vet the information. And honestly, most Christians don't really live as if they believe. I mean, you think about it. If they believe that the guy who spun the universe into motion considers them the most beloved creature in the universe, so much that he killed a part of himself for them. But they still have health insurance. They pay thousands of dollars a year for health. Well, why would you do that? They lock their doors at night. Why would you do that if you felt like that the architect of the universe had your back? Why would you load your handguns for Pete? Why would you bother if the omnipotent being, the greatest, most powerful being ever, had your back? Most people live as if they don't believe, I think.
including the Pope, who travels around behind 3 inches of bulletproof glass. And if that isn't a statement of a lack of faith, I don't know what is.
Yeah. Have you seen
I
that?
made a video a long time ago called "There Are No Atheists in Hospital Waiting Rooms," which is not an elegant title, but you get the idea. Which there are no theists in hospital waiting rooms, and that's because no one in that hospital waiting room is relying entirely on faith to heal their loved one or save the life of someone. Now they pray in addition to, but that in addition to is a bit hollow, isn't it, when someone's inside the ER hammering and sawing and trying to save the life. Maybe God will guide their hand, right? That's as much as we're willing to give, right? Whereas in the Bible you have all these examples of complete miracles. So people don't live their lives, as you say, according to a belief in miracles. They assume that miracles won't really happen. So it is funny. It affects a lot of things.
Concordance, if I may, I don't think it's necessarily miracles. I think it's the power of prayer. You ask these people, God will answer prayers. Now, I've got a test for this. I know that I have mentioned this previously on the show. It's some time ago now. But one way of testing the level of an individual's belief in God and the power of prayer is to force them to wear dog tags. When they are hit in a road traffic accident and the paramedics arrive, the first thing they look for is the dog tags. If they find those religious dog tags, rather than waste time in a hospital, they take them to the nearest church and leave them on the doorstep and see how far prayer gets them. Now, of course, at that point, you realise that none of them actually believe in the power of prayer at all, although they will say in other circumstances that they do. And if only we could try that just for a week or so to see what the reaction would be.
There's another
test I like.
I'm sorry, forgive me. I keep walking over concordance, and I'm your guest.
He's a dinosaur.
Go ahead.
If he tramples over you, you're in trouble.
Well, let me real quick. Mine's just a quick one. The test I've always liked is how come amputees are never healed? In spite of all the prayer, they must constantly think of. Religious amputees never seem to have miraculous limb regrowth. So that obviously is beyond the scope of what the power of prayer is capable of.
There is another dimension to this that I hear often, and it's said with a straight face and with absolute sincerity, and it is this. I was in the hospital. I was diagnosed with whatever. It could be anything from cancer to heart failure to whatever. And it was my faith that got me through. And now we're speaking to hope. I had hope. I had something to hold on to. My faith actually aided in my healing. Now, what we're talking about obviously here is the power of positive thinking, but people are adamant that when I was there and I received those prayers, I felt emboldened. Even if they didn't go up to God, they gave me hope, and therefore they have merit. That's a harder one for me to navigate because, again, it's the unpopular position of saying, yeah, but you just went through $500,000 worth of medical treatment on your heart and a bypass surgery and all these other things. And you sort of helped yourself by having a positive attitude and by going through rehabilitation. And I don't know. I'm not well versed enough in neurochemistry to know how positive feelings impact healing. But as I understand it, attitude does go a long way when it comes to recovery. And some people attribute that to faith, and for that reason, they hold on to it dearly. So,
well, I know a couple of shows ago was talking about intercessory prayer and how actually it has a adverse effect. You just want to briefly recount.
The opposite is true.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. People standing by your bedside praying actually, on the whole, have a negative effect. Now, that's different from personal belief, and that's different from personal serenity. But if you know that someone is praying for you, the anxiety of knowing that people are worried about you and that I don't want to disappoint them can actually decrease the prognosis or make the prognosis worse post surgery, in particular in heart surgeries that are very high risk. A group of control versus a group of intercessory prayer patients were told or not told that someone was praying for them. And if they were told that someone was praying for them, they actually did worse.
So the question is, let's say I'm in the hospital. Let's say you're in the hospital for whatever. And a religious family member or friend comes in at your bedside and says, let me pray for you. What do you do? I mean, as a courtesy, do you say, knock yourself out? Look, I don't believe, but whatever. Or do you literally have to say, if you're going to pray, go out to the waiting room because I'm not interested? I mean, what would you say?
I think concordance can only give the answers to the result. I don't think you can explain the etiquette of
well, I can give you Wheaton's law, which is just don't be I'll say jerk because my kids are in the room. Don't be a jerk. Come on. Just it was a very thoughtful gesture. If it was offered in the spirit of compassion and hope and yada yada, all the good stuff, then just acknowledge that feeling behind it and move on. That's my feeling.
I bounced this idea off Concordance a few days ago, and I said, "How about this?" And he said, "Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable idea." And I said, "Look, I'll play devil's advocate, and I'll put forward the arguments that I think can be advanced for achievements of religion." And I spent 2 days in the back of my mind thinking of things that I could come up with, and I have to say that I've come up pretty short. But firstly, I'm sure I'm talking to two educated people and a very educated audience. Do you understand where the term devil's advocate comes from?
From the court systems, or
it's actually
from the Pope.
Yes,
from the
Catholic
papal
Church.
court. The papal court, yeah.
Yeah, or at the time the conclave is electing a new pope. The devil's advocate is the person appointed to basically cross-examine the potential future pope or popes, and it's actually a religious expression. So there we go. I'm sure a lot of people in the audience knew that. I've got a few points. This is the best I can come up with. I think we'll take a soft one first. It's produced some very nice buildings and some great artwork. Can anyone argue against that?
Yeah.
Nope, you win.
Is that one?
Thanks for watching, everybody.
That's 1-0 to me then. Wow.
I'm right along with you. I think people project God or what have you onto inspiration and art and all of these type, and which speaks to architecture and art and music and what have you. But I honestly, I don't see it as anything more than human endeavor and human accomplishment painted with the God brush, and that's all I got.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? All these churches always need money, either to be built, to be refurbished, or the church roof is in trouble. God never seems to help them. I think you're right. Concordance.
People are always nicking the lead off the top, right? No, I'm not gonna give you, as the devil's advocate, any credit for anything not specifically commanded in the Bible, right? If you find me the verse where it describes, the architecture to do, or I demand of you this fine art. And the other thing I think you have to do is differentiate between classical art, basically of the classical God figures, and Christian art. And I think what you'll find is they're the same basic themes, right? Nothing new came into the world when it became, say, Christian religious icons, right? Before that, it was Greek religious icons, the classical gods. And in many cases, directly taken from, right? Why do we have cherubs? Well, the cherubs predate Christianity by a lot, right? They were cultural elements that were brought in. Why do we have this bearded guy in a robe? That's frickin' Zeus, all right? We've borrowed, we've acculturated all these different icons from all of these different cultures. And of course, the only people who could afford to be a patron of the arts for a vast majority of human history was this large institution which took a tax from every person who was a member, which was, in many cases, everyone in the country. So here you've got this enormous wealth. You were either painting the monarch or you were painting the religious icon. And there's plenty of portraits of the Pope out there as well, because he's some kind of halfway in between those two. So no, I don't give any credit to that. You paint what the patron asks you to paint. And if you look back over history, there's really no new themes being introduced with the monotheistic religions.
You're a hard taskmaster, Concordance. Do you not think that my side of the argument is difficult to argue enough already without you putting these limitations on it? But just talking about the payments to the church.
Then look at a major cathedral. Right? The difference is the walls. That's about it. The idea of a large airy space where man could commune with the things that were above him. that massively predates Christianity. The idea of these large echoing chambers, which had a sort of a silence and a hiss and would absorb sounds so that you had this sort of reverent feel. That concept was not invented by the monotheistic religions. Now, you can say that the idea of transcendence motivated these types of architectures, these vast towering structures, where people felt like, you know, up there in the rafters, that's a different world up there, because no human could ever traverse that space between me and that. But the Parthenon and the Sistine Chapel are virtually the same, except the walls, the pitch of the roof, maybe.
Okay. Well, interesting enough, I just wanted to mention, because what you said reminded me of a program that I saw a few weeks ago about the origins of the Catholic Church. And the present Vatican, as it is now, was not as it always has been. In fact, one of the popes had the previous one torn down to rebuild the one that we see now. And he got into financial difficulties, as you can imagine. And the way in which he made his money was effectively selling trinkets. But also, I forget the word, is it indulgences or whatever, that where if you pay enough money, the priests will pray for your dead relatives to be allowed into heaven or something. Quite outrageous.
Yeah. To forgive sins, you can sort of prepay sins.
Ex post facto and ex post mortem, or post mortem. Right. Yeah, forgiveness of these things, and they made huge amounts of money for it, quite shamelessly. All right. Well, you want one that I can refer back to the Bible. Okay, moral guidance. Not only in the form of the Ten Commandments, but other preachments in the Bible. That's an achievement, isn't it? To give.
I was at a stoning the other day. There was an unruly child, and this woman came up to me, and of course she was silent because she is commanded to be silent. So she used sign language, which is allowed. She pointed out someone with a tattoo. So the two of us went, and I forget what is the punishment for a tattoo. And this other guy was eating a blood sausage, so we burned him at the stake. So yeah, it's hard to argue with that one.
Should we call that a score draw? Seth, what's your view?
I'm just stunned by how you rattled off so many of those from memory. I do the same thing. I always tell people, look, if you're going to talk about whether or not people, you go up to a believer and you'll say, look, what are the most important moral guidelines ever given to humankind? And the Ten Commandments, it just rolls off the tongue, right? Well, what are they? Well, the vast majority of Americans can't name even 5 of the 10. And then you have to remind them, actually, there aren't 10. There are many more than 10. And if you're at a seafood restaurant and you show them in the scriptures that the eating of shellfish is an abomination to the Lord, and if they're, you're using the same book to condemn homosexuals as they are the same book that says do not boil a goat in its own mother's milk, that kind of thing. Well, some of it's for yesterday and some of it's for today. I don't see the Ten Commandments as a moral guideline at all. In fact, the first 4 are wasted on God's vanity. It's all about me. There are no instructions as to how to treat each other. It's all about telling God that he's the man. And I'm like, well, what an incredible waste of space. I mean, he had 10 commandments and he used 4 of them on you. To me, it seems like and the idea that don't steal, don't kill, don't covet your neighbor's wife, what have you.
Yes, he doesn't mention anything about pedophilia, incest, rape, slavery. None of it.
Well, actually, slavery is being supported. Of course, they always call it indentured servitude as part of and it fits the model that we are servants of Christ, therefore servants serve their masters, but it's to everyone's mutual benefit. But yeah, it's some of it was for yesterday, some of it was for today. Or my favorite, it was a different time. Like I'm sorry, I can beat my slave so badly that it takes him 48 hours to get up. And if he can get up at that 47th hour and 59th minute and he can walk away, I'm off the hook as an owner and I'm not done anything immoral. Well, we got a problem. And
let's take a look at anthropology. If we go back to the ancient times, you've got the Code of Hammurabi, right? That predates anything in the Bible. And the Code of Hammurabi had a lot of the same concepts, but they were secular concepts. And so obviously Christians did not invent, and Jews, the Jewish people did not invent the idea of not murdering each other. That was not that was not a religious innovation, And obviously it's not all that applicable given the number of Christians on death row. We know that it's not a definitive rule. People still feel like they're going to go to heaven because they're forgiven. In fact, you could say that in terms of morality, the idea of eternal forgiveness is sort of negates anything that might have been gained by having codified moral laws, because now you can do those things. You just have to be sure to be really sorry about having done them post facto, which is marvelous.
You can also look in the at least in the Christian culture here in the United States. Look at the divorce rate. I mean, divorce is frowned upon. There are some church cultures that consider it to be adultery, even with a legal divorce. If you then get married to someone else and sleep with them, it's still adultery in the eyes of God. And yet the divorce rate in the church is just as high, or in fact, I think a little bit higher than the average. So, people are people, no matter how you slice it.
Can we just, before we move too far off the topic, I would like to go back, if I may, Seth, to a comment that you made about the fact that, there were different times then. I have to say that this is the argument that I hear most often when I advance the sort of slavery argument to the believer. And it's normally, that was a different time, that was the Old Testament. Everything changed after Jesus sacrificed himself. Now, I've never understood that argument, and I'm asking you, and I'm not seeking to embarrass you, but you once believed this. Can you explain the argument? Because I do not understand it.
Well, let me frame it in my own defense like this. We are taught to understand the Bible as it is largely told to us from the pulpit. And when we learn memory verses, Bible verses, they were cherry-picked to be happy verses, or even the ones that were not so happy were framed in the context of God is just, he knows what's best. I was in my 30s before I ever knew about the commandments I read my Bible. I just didn't see them. I may have read them, but I didn't see them. The commandments about how a rapist should pay the father of the rape victim 50 shekels and then marry the rape victim. They never teach that one in Sunday school. And it's amazing when you're wearing what I call God glasses, you don't see the detritus. You don't see the stuff that is uncomfortable, unpleasant, dirty, immoral, whatever. You just don't see it. And you celebrate what is, the God of love, the love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13 and what have you. Now, what I say to people who come to me and say, well, that was the God of the Old Testament. We now have the new covenant. Jesus Christ came and gave us a new covenant and has rescued us because he atoned for sin. The concept of atonement is that you would, in the Old Testament times, the atonement was they would take I think it was a goat or a lamb or a ram, and they would pray to cast the sins of the village or the person onto the animal, and then they would sacrifice the animal. Or maybe you've heard of the term scapegoating. They would actually transfer the sins into a goat and send the goat off into the desert to starve to death and die. This was how atonement was made. Sin must be paid for, period. Someone's got to pay, so they would transfer it into the animal and send it out. Well, Christ atoned for us, meaning he was the sacrifice on the altar on our behalf because we deserved it. And now the Old Testament law is not applicable, and that's a different time. And I say two things. First of all, Christ came in Matthew 5 not to change the law or to, what is the scripture? I have not come, I've come to affirm, every letter of the law will be affirmed, according to Christ.
Yes, Matthew 5, 16 and 17. I'll find it as you carry on.
Jot of the law.
Yeah. He said, look, I've come essentially to affirm it. Secondly, Jesus is God, right? There's the Holy Trinity, Jesus, God, the Holy Spirit. Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit are essentially one. They are manifestations of the same creature. And if Jesus Christ in the New Testament, Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. God then is the same yesterday, today, and forever, meaning that the same God who killed a guy for trying to steady the ark of the covenant, whenever Uzzah, remember, they were walking and the oxen stumbled and the covenant was going to fall? Uzzah literally steps in and saves the day. He doesn't want the ark to hit the floor. He saves it. God reaches down and immediately executes him. That's the same dude from Matthew through Revelation as is in the Old Testament. It's the very same God. my
yes,
last argument
just before
is,
we move on,
forgive
Matthew
me, go ahead.
5:17. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. But what's interesting in Matthew 10, literally a few chapters away, he says, "Do not suppose I've come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I will come to turn a man against his father, or a daughter against his mother, or a daughter-in-law against her mother," and goes on of various, but not entirely related.
Think about Jesus and the apostles. I mean, he went and essentially said, "Drop everything and follow me." Now, did these men have loved ones? Did they have livelihoods? Did they have families? What have you? I mean, essentially, Jesus is, everything else goes by the wayside. Everything you care about must be sacrificed in favor of me. Now, we are taught that this is virtue. The last thing I tell people is that if Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever, how does God write a book that goes out of date? And why is the Old Testament continue to be included in the scriptures that are his message to the world, 7 billion people on this planet? Look, if you were someone who was handing out a life and death message in a letter, and you realize that the message was either incorrect or had been mistranslated or had been corrupted or was just wrong in some way, would you not do everything in your power to correct the record? Why hasn't Yahweh stepped in and essentially fixed it up so that we here in the year 2013 have the correct message? It says a lot about Yahweh, like he ain't there or he doesn't care, one of the two.
So let me give what I think the devil's advocate should be saying here, TPR, which is that we have used the Bible as the basis for a lot of decisions that we've made societally. I'm going to negate my own argument. If you can imagine basically the Bible as a blank sheet of paper on which we draw our own picture, on which we pull out our own meaning, so that each generation reinterprets the same scripture to mean something slightly different. We are now servants of God, indentured servants of God. Before it was no doubt slaves, because it was a slave religion. It was a religion for slaves. I think you could probably do the same thing with almost any literary work throughout history. Something on the scope of, say, the Odyssey could be the basis for a system of morality. All you have to decide is what the Cyclops means and what the sirens represent. They represent temptation, and we are to resist temptation. Or we could use the Iliad or Beowulf or any of the great fictional books throughout history could be used in the same basic way, and that is to give us some blank archetype against which to throw our own perception of the world, our own fears, our own concerns, and our own moral laws. And so if I were to say, is the Bible the basis of morality, I would actually say yes, but yes, it is the system by which we have evaluated each new moral system as it's come out. But actually, the Bible has changed as much as our moral system, at least in terms of our interpretation. So it's protean. It keeps changing to meet our needs. And not in any active way. We just start disregarding things that we're embarrassed about in the past. And that's why, Seth, you as a young man were growing up reading this Bible, but only the parts that were still culturally relevant at the time. If you had grown up and our religious book was the Iliad, and you were worried about Zeus and what Zeus had to think about, in his acceptance of, I don't know, maybe you cut the fat off your steak and push it to the side of the plate, and that's your sacrifice to Zeus, we would still be coming up with the same basic concepts. It's the zeitgeist, right? As Dawkins would say, we impose the spirit of the times on the book, which is our blank slate on which to draw. Not that the book imposes any kind of laws on us.
Will I be tested on this? Because, wow.
I'm not sure that's the devil's advocate position, but I'm not saying that I disagree with you.
Well, I'm saying there's a way in which to say, yes, the Bible is the basis for our morality, but it's not the Bible itself. It's the interpretation of the Bible. Again, it is the blank slate on which we are drawing.
But it's not a blank slate.
It's held us back in a number of times. But if you ask someone why this is right, it's giving them an excuse to do what they already know is right. The problem is when it gives them an excuse to know an excuse to do what they know is wrong. So, in terms of being the basis of morality, human judgment is the basis of morality, but the Bible is the medium through which we evaluate those claims, or we express those claims, and we just choose to keep reinterpreting the Bible until it suits whatever the cultural position is, whatever our human reason tells us is moral.
Okay, well, before I move on to my next point, I just want to highlight something, and this shows the difficulty I had in finding achievements of religion, because I even bunged those words into Google to see if it had come up with anything. And one of the first hits was the achievements of Pope John Paul II. And it lists them. I'm going to go through them briefly. This, I think, sums up the problem that the church has. It begins, this is BeliefNet. Don't know much about the site, but the papal achievements of John Paul II. The papacy of John Paul II was one of superlatives. Among his achievements were, you ready? The number of overseas visits he made, the number of trips inside Italy, the number of cities he visited, the number of foreign countries visited, the number of speeches given, the time on the road, percentage of the papacy spent travelling, the miles travelled. I mean, this is it. One of the things I was going to do was to ask you to compare the achievements of science to the achievements of religion, but that would be so unfair, because if it was a boxing match, it would be stopped before the first bell rang, because the achievements of science are just so tangible. We see them and utilize them every single day of our lives. But this is one of the greatest popes in modern history, and this is his achievement. It goes on. The number of miles traveled around the world, the number of people's, I don't know how to pronounce this, beatified, number of saints made. This is achievements. Do you understand the difficulty it is playing devil's advocate on this argument?
He's the accidental
Let me
tourist.
take that, DPR.
Yeah.
Let me take that. So the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, was probably the first world government. I don't know. Yeah, I'll stick to that. I'm not sure I can defend it, but let's say that the Catholic Church was the first transnational government. The idea of a power to which kings must bow, and I think in that sense, the Catholic Church, although they had their own agenda, they were a predecessor to the League of Nations and the United Nations. Right? It was an idea that the Pope was someone that even kings had to be wary of. And that's still somewhat true. A lot of tin-pot dictators are very concerned about their politics with regards to the Catholic Church. Now, for the most part, that's been a negative impact. But in some cases, it's kept communism at bay. And I think that's one thing some people attribute to John Paul was that a lot of the Latin American countries were on the verge of communist rebellions when the Pope showed up. And the Pope talked about the church, and he reinstilled religious values, and that held communism off. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm just saying that this is one of the impacts that the Catholic Church in particular has had. It has historically been a transnational government with no accountability, but a transnational government nonetheless.
Let me just carry on very briefly. Number of heads of state and prime ministers met, number of general audiences, but this is the one that I found quite confusing. The number of pilgrims met in audiences, 17,642,800. I don't know what met in audiences means, but that's a very accurate figure to put on an amount such as 17 million plus.
Have you never seen him receiving pilgrims, where he basically, the guy towards the end of his life, he was just like hunched over in his chair. He looked like he was dead. I mean, there were a lot of times when I thought, he died like 2 years ago, and they've like
traveled with his statistician. I mean, he just had a guy with
no, I know exactly what it is. Each person that goes through has their name registered, right? And kisses the ring, and they, it says something, and then the Pope makes some little, accordion noise, and then you're dismissed. And so he can get through, 8 a minute. And I'm sure that someone somewhere has a list of every name of every person cleared to see the Pope, right? Can't you imagine the security know the name of everyone who's ever held that hand and been mumbled at?
The expression "kissing the papal ring" is always sort of like trouble me a little bit, but
Euphemistic.
all right. Let me try another one. The church does a lot of, and let's not forget concordance. It's the achievements of religion, not the achievements of Christianity. Religion has done a lot of charity work. Back of the net, 1-0. 2-0, actually. Can't argue against that, can you?
I'm reminded of a certain annual fundraiser I participate in with a number of atheists.
Damn, I've been rumbled.
I think to myself, it is, it's interesting to see the charity that does happen stemming from the church, quite often done with a real desire to try to improve the planet, to try to help people, to try to feed mouths and bring medicine and build shelters. Ultimately, though, all of those stand in the shadow of the largest mission, which is to create soul-winning opportunities to bring converts into the kingdom. And ultimately, outside of that, Christopher Hitchens is right. There is no moral action that is done by a believer that could not also be done by a non-believer. These people could go in just like Doctors Without Borders and many other organizations and create opportunities for help and healing and what have you, without having to even mention God once in a sentence. They come in and it's human hands helping human hands. And I myself have become very cynical, probably to a fault, about Christian charity. I think to myself, ultimately, if the end zone is trying to win hearts and minds, but first they're going to, before they look, how they present it to us is before you can come to somebody with the message of Jesus Christ, you have to, before you can feed the spirit, you must feed the body. So there's a tactic involved. If you go to a hungry person, they're not listening. You have to feed the body. You have to meet their physical needs before then you are allowed or able to be effective in meeting their spiritual needs. And I don't think it's, there's nothing that can be done in the church charity-wise that secular organizations could not also do.
You mentioned Matthew 5, isn't it? In that same speech, he says something along the lines of give up everything and give to the poor and whatever. How does that, I don't know whether it is Matthew 5, but even if it isn't, it's somewhere amongst Jesus' sayings. How do you think that marries up? And I've stopped playing devil's advocate for a moment. Not that I was doing a very good job. How do you think that marries up with the idea of building multi-$100 million churches, or building a model of the Ark at the cost of 150, 250 million? Imagine what an organization such as Doctors Without Borders could do with 150 million, as opposed to building a fucking another mega church.
Yeah.
For what? I mean, why is the building of a church necessary? I mean, surely God can see through hypocrisy. If people pray individually to him in their own bedrooms, he's still going to know about it. They don't need to build all this stuff. They don't have to spend all this money. It's just unnecessary waste.
I don't want to trod too much on concordance's time here because I feel like I've been.
No,
but I must interject. There is an organization. There are some organizations out there, and their main business model is to construct 200-foot-tall crosses that are then erected next to highways, major highways, or on top of hills next to churches and towns and neighborhoods. Many a times there'll be 3 crosses. There'll be a 200-foot center cross, and then the thieves' crosses are lower on each side, at the cost of, huge expense to have these made. Now, the church rationalizes this, that everyone who drives by will be reminded of the message of the cross. And I think to myself, how could a church justify funneling their money into one of these things when they could be feeding hungry mouths or providing medicine or creating benefit to the community, doing something real and tangible? To me, it's offensive. Or not.
Let's take some specifics here. I think there's a really good point, Seth, that there is some baggage that comes along with Christian charity. Okay, we're not talking Christian, religious charity. But if you look at the American Red Cross, and I know alarm bells go off for everybody, that's not really a religious organization. It is primarily secular in nature. Now, it has some religious trappings. Which side of the fence do we drop it on? I would claim it for my own. I would claim it as a secular charity because its donations are primarily non-religious. The kind of budget it's dealing with is, cheating from the wiki page, $3.5 billion. You know, the international organization, that's just the U.S., the international organization has about the same budget, but they have like 9.5 million volunteers and employees. I think that, and I'm talking here about the Red Cross and Red Crescent, is a secular group. And I'm not sure that the surveys would agree, but it doesn't have an explicitly religious mission. It's
Are they overtly proselytizing on when they go out, though, and bring aid to, say, a disaster-stricken area?
No, they are not.
And that's the difference.
If you read their charter, and I happen to know quite a lot about them just from they're a major player in the diagnostic market that I happen to work in. They're science-driven. They're religiously historical group. I mean, they formed during the Civil War, but they are not an explicitly religious group, and they are often counted as a religious group. If you take Catholic Charities, which has about the same number of dollars being expended, and they have a very large umbrella of Catholic-related charities, their money is going much more towards what they call program support, which are things like printing off leaflets talking about Jesus and providing, religious counseling to people in crises, which I think is kind of a low blow. If people ask for it, so be it. But the fact that they put all those people into that disaster zone suggests that they're trying to push an agenda. And United Way, I think is up there around 4.2 billion, and they are, I think, they used to be at least completely secular, or the umbrella organization itself was completely secular. Go ahead.
When I was in Christian radio, I took 2 overseas trips for a couple of Christian charity. Well, it's one Christian charity organization, a child sponsorship thing called Compassion International. And I think they said 70% of all the money given went straight to benefit a child directly. And of course, you have to vet that yourself. But at the time, I was a true believer and traveled overseas, and we saw firsthand that it's obvious they were bringing some tangible good into these situations. They were bringing these people out of the depths of poverty. They were creating opportunities for education to help break the cycle of poverty. It's difficult to argue against that. Now, looking back, I simply wish it had not been done with Jesus mentioned everywhere they went, and having church and prayer and all those types of things. We did a fundraiser last year for Charity Water. They build wells in these impoverished areas. Now, the owner, as I understand it, I found out after the fact, is a believer. He had some kind of experience, and he wanted to then better the world. But his organization is not a religious organization. They're not going in and spreading leaflets and putting statues of Jesus up. They're building wells. And for that reason, quite frankly, when I found out that he was a believer, whatever his personal story was, I was still happy to continue to be a part of that charity and what they do. I still think what they do has merit. And I don't know, it's a fine line. I think, you can be religious. It's almost like being a politician. Look, be religious if you want, but just make sure that you're not bleeding it inappropriately into what you do.
And we will take our first caller after we've discussed, I imagine somewhat briefly, my next point, which is that religion offers people a way of getting rid of their sins. And today, apparently, is the largest religious meeting in the world. It takes place in India, where a huge amount of Hindus go to the Ganges and wash themselves, believing that by doing so, they reveal themselves, relieve themselves of sin, not just their previous sins, but their sins for life. It seems a common factor between all religions, doesn't it, that they afford this opportunity of offloading your sins. But hey, isn't that a good thing? You just go and say sorry on a Sunday to your Catholic priest, or you can just kneel and say sorry to some imaginary man in the sky, and I accept Jesus as my savior. You're relieved of sins. If you're a Hindu, you just go and wash yourself in the Ganges. And this is good, isn't it? I hear the tumbleweed.
I was going to let his the wise voice of concordance lead on. So,
well, my comment earlier was they may be unloading sins, but they're certainly loading up on cholera. The Ganges is a major source of infection, and all the religious people washing themselves are also washing their laundry and, let's say, eliminating wastes nearby, so that we have a major sanitation issue along the Ganges. You can't touch that, though, because of the religious overtones. You can't deal with public sanitation. You certainly can't chlorinate. You can't chlorinate the river of God. I've often wondered, too, about the holy water after it's been dipped on so many infants, whether or not that's been chlorinated as well.
You cannot chlorinate the river of God. That has to be
credit for that one.
That has to be put on a plaque and mounted somewhere important in my house. That's really wisdom. I remember going to a church service when I was younger, and of course that's the general idea: is take your burdens, cast off your burdens, allow Him to carry your burden. Right? It's the same sort of concept as the poem "Footprints in the Sand." Right? There are two footprints, rows of footprints. There's you and there's Jesus. And then during the darkest moments of your life, there's only one set of footprints. And you look up and say, why did you abandon me? And Christ says, it was at those moments that I carried you. And this is the concept that they cast your cares upon Jesus. Let Him bear the burden. And I remember they had a cross in the service. And they handed out pieces of paper. And they said, we want you to write down the things that are burdening you in your life. And, are you having financial trouble? Are you arguing with your spouse? Are you doing this? Do you have an addiction to pornography? Do you have whatever? Are you a drinker? And people would take these things, and one by one, they went up and they would nail, right? They would nail those closed pieces of paper to the cross. It was a symbolic gesture of release. I am taking this. I'm now giving it up. It is now no longer a burden to me. And at the time, it's a very moving moment. There were tears and the music plays, and it was all kind of a conditioned response environment. And I think to myself, now it's like, we were looking at Alcoholics Anonymous and how people say they do so much good. And of course, you look at the statistics and you realize that no, actually, statistically, they're really not. And the best good comes when people take responsibility for themselves. What if we had focused instead on taking our problems to the cross and taking them directly to the people who were most involved, and being realistic with ourselves? How much healthier and more effective would that have been as a way to deal and to gain release and happiness and fulfillment in life?
So it feels good, but it's not actually doing anything. And I think that's
moving.
That's the key point.
But if it makes people feel better, why is it a bad thing?
Well,
because
cocaine
the behavior
makes people
recurs.
feel better. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that first hit of meth, I'm sure, makes you feel amazing. But the ultimate question is it healthy? Is it a healthy way to approach these types of things? So.
Well, I'm doing such an appalling job as devil's advocate for the religious cause. I've brought in Robert. Welcome to the show. I think you wanted to put forward an argument in support of religion. Perhaps you'd like to unmute your mic.
I can't hear him. Is his mic muted on Skype?
Yeah.
Hello?
There we go. That's
Sorry
good.
about that.
No problem. What have you got for us?
Thanks for having me.
What have you got for religion?
Your question seems pretty broad. And what I'd like to look at is something that predates some of the modern religions that are around, monotheism, etc., and look a little further back in time. It seems, at least based on some superficial research that I've done, that religion, in some form or another, has been a mainstay throughout human society, and it seems to me that there are at least forms of it that date back 25,000 BC and beyond. What I'd like to posit is that religions as they were back then did help society at least start in a very early sense. It might have helped with some sort of tribalism. It might have helped humans form communities, social structures, where tribes would actually battle for resources, perhaps with other tribes, and religion just helped in some sort of amalgam to bring people together. And it can be seen more into recorded history as well, with those religions, those societies, the Egyptians, the Romans, the Greeks, the Aztecs, you name them, that they've all had some sort of god. So far as I'm aware, there's not been any early society that I know of that existed without a god. Now, that being the case, I'd like to suggest that religion helped those societies, and moreover, it seems that many of those societies that did have gods had gods that weren't quite the benevolent sorts. And as you move more into present day, you can look at Spain and the conquistadors, things like this, and you can see how those early societies spread their power and spread it with the religion. They used religion as a conduit. So what I'm suggesting in short is that early on, religion might have been a way for humanity to spread throughout the globe and actually propagate itself somewhat more successfully, but I don't believe that holds true today.
So let me ask a really basic question right back to you, Robert. Why do you think the religion was causative in the society and not the society causing the religion?
Well, I think
how do you attribute the causation direction?
Well, I'm sure society did cause religion, but if you look at what religion does to people, and I don't know if I'm answering this correctly, but I'll do my best. If you look at what you yourselves say religion does to people these days, how it can make people into fervent zealots in the Middle East and elsewhere in the USA in relation to issues like abortion, etc., etc., I think it's very hard to deny that psychologically religion has a powerful influence on people, regardless of whether religion is born through society, and yes, it probably was. That's of little consequence to me. The fact is that religion was there, and it likely had powerful properties back then as it does now. Except early on, those properties might have been more necessary, although I suspect it could cause a lot of deaths and ritualized sacrifices, and on we go. Back then, those might have been reasonable sacrifices so that society would form as it did. So I'm sure they worked hand in hand. I don't know if that's the answer you wanted, but that's the answer I have.
Well, so far we've talked about water magic and blood magic during the show. The blood magic is this idea that, if we cut something throat and blood comes spilling out, that somehow that has some, special properties, something magical. Because it's an emotional kind of thing. We've talked about water magic. The water can wash away things. So it can wash away dirt. Maybe it can wash away the dirt inside. We're talking about people surrounded by a scary natural world. And so they invent these explanations. What I think I would say is that religion is our codified response to those things. It's the narratives that the society creates in order to formalize our relationship to nature. It is the supernatural elements that every society invents. I'm not sure that you can attribute back to it anything which we then do. If the behaviors and the people decide what the religion will be, then I can't necessarily say that the religion was causative of other things that are unrelated. So you say basically that these cultures developed or institutions developed in the same society in which religion was a prevalent force. I'm not sure. I think that would be a direct chain of causation. Man creates religion, religion creates, I don't know, whatever, expeditions to the New World. I think you can skip the religion. Basically, men did both things. And until there's a true supernatural element, something that is actually invoked that was not in the people themselves, I don't think you've found any causation. Seth?
Well, I mean, I just, maybe I'm overly simplistic, but I just think we're talking about people who did not have the tools to understand the world, projecting explanation onto it. You know, you look at the stars and immediately you begin to conjure up all these explanations for what they are without really understanding them. You know, they didn't understand germ theory, and they, you know, they see an epileptic, they think it's some kind of possession. They, you know, we're talking about not having the tools to properly understand things makes it easy for the vulnerable, the corrupt, the charlatan, or just the imaginative, you know, to come in and create another explanation, to project whatever deity they want onto it. I don't know that. Do I think religion helped early societies organize and propagate and even thrive? You know, much of that may have been done in the name of religion, but I don't know honestly that the religion was the reason that their nation-building efforts were successful, in my opinion.
I have a quick question for you, Concordance. If I understood you correctly, you said that you wouldn't attribute the actions so much to religion as much as you would to people. So in today's world, I can pick of any of these two examples. Let's pick this one. You have just whatever church, pick one, the Protestant church, protests, abortions. Do you then take the same logic and blame people, or do you blame the Protestant church for the message that it sends out? Where do you attribute the blame? Do you just blame society in general, or do you actually blame the Protestant church? And if you do not blame, for example, the Protestant church, and you just blame society in general, then I don't quite understand the entire point of then advocating against what religious organizations do in the first place, if you're going to take the stance that it is society as a general. So basically, I'm trying to understand where you're coming from with this.
So there's a metaphysical question involved. Let's pick something cleaner, something a little simpler. Let's say that a group of people put together an idol, and then the priest of the idol, we'll call it the juju. The priest of juju decides that they should all go slaughter the neighboring tribe. I don't know where you say that it was sort of the fault of the idol, and when it was the fault of the people who think that their God is telling them what to do. And the same thing is true, I think, in your example. I think you're thinking of the Catholics. Catholics going out and protesting at an abortion clinic. They're answering a metaphysical question, and then they're acting on their own personal moral code. And the church is codifying that. The church has written it down very carefully. Here's what it is to be a good Catholic. But to me, it's still the people within the church. There's no commandment in the Bible that says thou shalt do this. God isn't actually speaking to these people. I'm not sure how much you can actually attribute to the church, except insofar as people are acting on what they have decided is the position of that church. Does that make sense?
I think I understand what he's saying, though.
It's as like a group of people.
It's like if the church stands on the biblical assertion that homosexuality is wrong, then that defines the foundation by which a culture might, a Bible-based culture might make homosexuality illegal, or it might be the foundation on which they build action. Would that be accurate, Robert?
Yeah, that would be fair.
We could look at slavery. Would you say that slavery was the result of religion, or let's say the abolition of slavery? Right? Many Christians acted on that, and there were certain churches that stood in opposition to slavery. But it was still the people. It was still the society itself that decided whether or not it was moral. There's that zeitgeist. I think I have more of I attribute more value to what the zeitgeist is, what the people decide is moral or is immoral, based on the little actions of multiple people contributing to an overall society or culture. And then the religion changes in response to that, right? Then suddenly we stop talking about the slavery in the Bible and we start hushing it up. And then several decades later, we no longer even acknowledge those verses sort of exist. So I think that the causation is the people make the decisions. and then they use the religious belief to justify whatever it is they were going to do anyway. It's very rare to me, I think, that people would respond to, right, that they really live their lives according to what the book says or what the idol is whispering to the priest who's interpreting the visions of the pigeons flying across the sky. That's all politics to me.
I do agree with you. Excuse me. I do agree with you. It is the people, and I apologize if my original statement didn't come through too clearly. I wasn't meaning to suggest that there was some idol or some ethereal being that was guiding people or guiding religion to build society together. Obviously, people did that. I'm merely saying that religion played a role in that, be it in whatever prehistoric form it was. It was, I suspect, a conduit. I don't see how one can really get around this. You look at the effects of it, and yes, there are certain inherent things that have to be common to something in order to call it a religion. There has to be a certain belief in some ethereal type of deity, some sort of afterlife, something of that nature in order for it to be called a religion. So that has to be intrinsic. And perhaps even that is a factor of our humanity, a factor of evolution, greater frontal lobe size, suddenly a reverence for the dead, spending time around makeshift graves, instead of just moving on, actually recognizing that another creature has died might be an element to that. And then building ceremony around that likely helped to establish early human culture. I don't know how to get around that. That seems to me logical, unless my facts are incorrect.
No, I agree completely. I just disagree, I think, with you on the causation. I think that since we acknowledge that these religions are man-made, they're basically the thinking of a person who wanted a certain thing to be true, that then to attribute some sort of independent causation to that, to say that it is an agent in itself, I guess as a sociological force, it's true. But as a, let's say, an independent actor, I don't think that's at all the case.
Well, no, it'll always be the amalgam of human minds that come together. And that's why it did change throughout time. Otherwise, it would have remained the same. It changed with us. Obviously, we changed it, didn't we?
Yes, that's what I was trying to say.
I think we're on the same page, more or less.
We're on the same
do
hymn
too.
sheet, I think is the expression.
Yeah.
Just before I introduce Thunderfoot, can I just remind people, if you'd like to join us, send a Skype contact request, Magic Sandwich Show. We've got free lines open, which is something that Seth never has to say, but if you'd like to come and join us, please do. But I think we're joined by Thunderfoot.
Seth is the drawer of a really cute puppy.
The bow is not my idea, by the way. That is not my idea. But
Just out of interest, is it a girl puppy?
it's
or
a girl.
guy
Yeah, this is my weekly co-host. Whenever I do the radio podcast on Tuesday nights, this dog usually sits in my lap and just kind of chills out. And I never thought I'd be a small dog person, but she stole my heart. This is what animals do. They wear you down, and then before you know it, you're a bumbling idiot around them. So
Yes, they're immensely cute.
yeah, well, she has her moments for sure.
Thunder, I'm not sure how much of the program you've caught. Thanks for joining us. We were talking
None.
about.
I just
All
got
right.
that.
Well, I was trying to play devil's advocate. I've done a miserable job. I was trying to advance an argument that religion may have achieved something for us, and I think I've been defeated on every single point that I've tried to raise so far. But just going back to the point that Robert was making, I think it was just over a year ago we had Professor Andy Thompson on the show, who's written the book Why We Believe in God or Gods. Well worth watching his videos and well worth reading his book. I'll put a link into that. But it seems fairly clear to me from what he's arguing is that it's almost inevitable that any human society is likely to end up creating some sort of religion or deity or deities. And he goes through reasons why that would be the case. I know, Concordance, that you're not a strong supporter of evolutionary psychology, but I think you were involved in the program. Did you have any specific issue in relation to his observations?
I think he and I were more or less on the same page. I always put the brakes on when I hear Evo Psych, but Andy is obviously a very good scientist, and he exposes those concepts to, brutal skepticism, where a lot of people get sucked into the idea of all of human behavior must make sense, must be evolutionarily selected for. That's just not the case. Most of what we do is just so random.
I do have his book here. I would say I will include it in the description when these videos are put on YouTube, but it is Why We Believe in God, open brackets, S Gods. Very easy read. I think very informative, and as I say, it left me, unfortunately, with a degree of pessimism that we're unlikely ever to rid ourselves of religion, because the propensity to create deities seems to be innate in us. Tumbleweed again. Wow. I'll tell you
well,
what,
when you
I'll
speak
just
so
shut the
definitively,
fuck up.
when you speak with that kind of authority, it silences the rest of us. We simply tremble in the wake of your turbulence. So that's just
You're too kind.
I think that's true, though. I honestly do think that so long as there are questions left unanswered, so long as people are afraid of anything, they'll imagine a big brother type. They'll imagine some sort of a supervisor. And what is interesting to me is the comparative anthropology of it, the world religions, and particularly those of cultures very different from our own. There's so much you can learn about how people perceive the world based on their religious beliefs.
If I make sort of a shading to that, I think as long as religion is profitable, as long as people are returning the tithe to the storehouse, as long as people are investing in blessings, as long as there are the charlatans among us, as long as religion is a money maker, it is profitable, it is business. As long as it is, it will always be here. There will always be somebody cashing in.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because on the page that I referred to, the BeliefNet thing with John Paul's great achievements or not, the adverts down the side of the page included, or the links included, why Christianity or why religion is dying and spirituality is on the increase. Now that's an interesting question, because I suspect it is. Even if you got rid of religion, I think people would still be spiritual in their sort of like beliefs that, trees have feelings and you can talk to dead people and Peter Popoff is not an evil piece of shit. I don't know. It seems, again...
For the record, DPR, you can talk to dead people all you want. They just don't respond.
They're good listeners. They're good listeners.
We addressed this last week in earlier this week in the podcast, last Tuesday. The concept of tithes and offerings is that the earth belongs to the Lord, according to Scripture, that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. It all belongs to Him. Everything we're using, we're simply stewards of it. And what we do is the church tells you to bring it back to the storehouse. You bring it back to give it to God so that He can then bless you. You're opening the floodgates of blessings. And of course, this is an amazingly powerful way to get people to part with their own message, with their own money, But as far as the spirituality thing, we addressed this as well. I honestly see I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual to be, in many cases, part of a retreat position away from religion, right? You retreat in stages. Many of us went from the Bible is inerrant and absolutely true and the perfect word of God and Jesus and God are real and Noah built the ark and all that. And then once that becomes inconvenient, well, part of the Bible is true, some of it's metaphor. Then you retreat back and see some was for yesterday, some is for today. And then you finally get to a point where you say, well, I don't believe the Bible, but I do believe in God. And after a while, you get to that point where I'm not religious, I don't go to church, but hey, I am spiritual. It's a way to be able to separate yourself from the insanity and the atrocities and the stuff that doesn't really add up. And at the same time, not go full bore and say, I don't buy it. You don't have to worry about hell, right? You don't have to worry about damnation or torment or getting the eternal question wrong. Now, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. I think it's a coping mechanism for people in many cases who are dealing with the fact religion does not make sense. So they just get rid of the religion part and say, now I'm spiritual. Now I'm just in touch. And that's kind of a cop-out in my opinion. I was guilty for many years.
Two brief points. The first one is to do with what Concordance was saying about as long as there are unknowns, people use a god as something to cover the unknowns. And I think the big unknown is, or the one that drives most people this way, is what happens when they die. And I think it's mostly an issue of perception, is that, we were all dead for the best part of 13 billion years, and it didn't seem to bother anyone. Why would you think that anything else is going to happen when you die? But what Seth was saying is, as long as there are charlatans, as long as it's profitable, this I think more goes to the social aspects of religion, where for certain religion has social bonding properties, and whilst there are these social bonding properties, there will be people who are essentially parasitic off of that and just use it to make money. But, in the libertarian sense, Seth is absolutely right. As long as it's profitable, there'll be organized religion. But you can't really get profit out of non-organized religion. It needs to be organized.
Well, I don't think Peter Popoff could be described as part of organized religion, and he makes an awful.
Of course.
That's what I was told. He doesn't have a church.
He almost has sort of a microcosm within the church, though. I mean, the mainstream Protestant Christian church disassociates with Peter Popoff. The large majority of, at least in my circle, they say, no. But what he has done then is he's created sort of his own insular group, and he bypasses the local church, and he goes out to men and women directly, advertising on television, sending out mass mailers and whatnot. So he's operating sort of independently. He's created sort of his own particular brand of, say, Protestant or Pentecostal Christianity. And he's done so successfully enough to become a millionaire many times over. Sucker is definitely born every minute.
Let me invite you to revisit. I know some of you weren't on the on the show, the last show we did, but someone called in and asked something along the lines of why it is that creationists have changed their tactics and have started trying to use, amongst other things, arguments from science and in particular physics. I thought about that subsequently, and what do you reckon to this argument? They're using it because they realize that physics and science is winning the argument. So rather than just ignoring it and talking about its failures, it now is seeking to embrace it, to show as if religion all the time had this sorted out and cornered, and they're basically realizing that people are paying more attention to science than they were before. Any mileage in that argument?
I think this is what I said last time, was I don't think there has been any change whatsoever. The only thing that's changed is the world. The world now has a lot more science in it, and people know a lot more science. So the tricks of apologetics, which are to start from the position that this statement is true, and then find all the facts that you can find that might possibly lead along that avenue. And it's a lot of cherry picking, and it's a lot of hand waving, and it's a lot of confirmation bias. But I think they're just operating in a different environment than they used to operate in. There was a very scientifically illiterate a group of people that they were appealing to, and I think that as science education improves, inevitably apologetics will change to match that. I don't think there's been any change in strategy.
Well, I would add a slight caveat to that, in that I think one of the reasons that people target Big Bang and quantum mechanics is because basically no one understands it. And when I say no one, I mean it's 1 in 10,000 probably has a moderate idea of what the hell's going on with these things. So it's an absolutely superb way of kicking the ball into the long grass, and no one is likely to ever be able to contest you on these points. And even if they do, no one will be able to tell who is right or not, because it'll just be, to a large extent, it'll just be two people talking gobbledygook. Yeah,
before you go further, Thunder, I apologise for cutting through you. Seth is obviously messaging behind the scenes, so you don't see it, but he's got to leave us now. Family commitments. Can I just thank Seth very much indeed for stepping in at the very last moment to help us out during the course of this show. It's always a pleasure to talk to him. Let me give another shout out for his book, links to which will be in the videos when they're posted on YouTube. But Seth, thank you very much indeed. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Enjoy the rest of the day with your family.
Thank you very much for letting me play along with you guys, and we'll talk again soon.
Take care.
Thanks, Seth.
Ciao.
So big thumbs up for Seth, and sorry, Thunder, do carry on.